Hello, dear listeners. Welcome to CareSmartz360 On Air. I'm Erin Kell, Account Executive at CareSmartz360. Today, we have Wayne Connell on the panel, who is a visionary advocate redefining how the world sees invisible disabilities. As founder and CEO of the Invisible Disabilities Association, he spent nearly 3 decades amplifying the voices of those living with illness, pain, and disabilities often unseen. From creating Invisible Disabilities Week to hosting global summits and authoring But You Look Good, how to encourage and understand people living with illness and pain, Wayne's mission is simple yet powerful: to transform misunderstanding into empathy and silence into awareness. Today, we explore how his movement continues changing hearts, homes, and workplaces. Welcome to the podcast, Wayne.
Oh, thank you so much. Really happy to be here.
So we'll jump right in. The first question that we have for you is, why do agencies often miss invisible disabilities?
Well, it really kind of comes down to, if we think about what invisible disabilities are, and when we really talk about invisible disabilities are really that invisible nature of illness that you can't see. It's the things that may be visible signs, depending on the illness. I mean, it could be fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue, it could be MS, Lyme disease, but it could be somebody in a wheelchair who has chronic pain, right? It's that invisible disability. It's that thing that you can't see. It's addictions, phobias, a whole bunch of different things that we kind of put in there, as well as a chronic illness, chronic pain, those things. But about 80% of the people that have a disability don't use any kind of assistive device on a regular basis. So you wouldn't know that they actually are living with an invisible disability. And that's the biggest issue, is that we don't see it with our eyes, and so we miss it. And so we also, there are things that become unbelievable to us too, right? And the things we're like, you mean you can't do this? You look like you can. Or what do you mean fragrances bother you? That doesn't make any sense. It doesn't bother anybody else, or whatever. We have these preconceived notions of what we see. I think of even the person in a crosswalk walking slow or driving slow in the slow lane. We have these notions: are they 85 years old, or why are they walking slow? It's just that real invisible nature that catches us. And what's the one symbol we think of is the wheelchair, and the wheelchair is a visible symbol. It's an accessible symbol. So, IDA, Invisible Disabilities, is really trying to lead the way in helping people understand that what an invisible disability is.
Right. And how does stigma impact care delivery?
Well, one of the big issues is with this. If you think about stigma, we use the term invisible disabilities. Okay, it's a technical term, right? And I want to kind of talk a little bit more about that too. Is that the difference between between a disability and somebody who's disabled too? Because that's one of these little stigma things too. Is that a disability with an accommodation allows people to do lots of amazing things. I mean, people run Ironman triathlons who have some sort of assistive device, right? But they have a disability. But disabled really means you're unable to do a major life activity, and you're not able to work anymore. Those things. So people who are disabled have disabilities. People with disabilities are not necessarily disabled, but we've kind of in our society have said, oh, they're disabled. And then, of course, you have the reaction of, I'm not disabled, I'm disabled, and they capitalize the A and all this stuff, which really creates this kind of craziness in that area. And we also have the notion of, we create new words for everything, right? We create these new words where we say, like with children are special who have developmental disabilities, and children are special who have gifted and talented, supposedly, or twice, whatever they want to call it. But what about the kids in the middle? Are they special? No. We need to quit creating words in the sense of, so the term invisible disability is a technical term. That's the first part. That's how you look at stigma, where, as well as you look at this prevalence, as we talked about a little bit ago, is this 80%, 27% of adults in the US have a disability, 57% have chronic illness. It's actually the normal thing to actually have. It's not the abnormal thing in that sense. And so what happens is that's how we overcome the stigma, is that it's helping people understand that it's okay to share, right? It's okay for them to reveal that they have a disability, because it's actually not the uncommon thing. It's the common thing. Mm-hmm. As well as I want to say is that disabilities are part of life. So in the sense of, not that it defines you and makes you like a lesser person, because that's not what it does, but it's part of who you are. I mean, you may live in Indiana, have brown hair, and have Crohn's disease. Okay. Well, that Crohn's disease is part of who you are just as much as being right-handed is, right? It's that thing that you have to live your life differently. How does it impact you? You have to look at my diet. How do I eat? How do I deal with doctors? How do I get care? Those things. And so we want to make it, and this is a big part of Invisible Disabilities, kind of our mission is to change the way the world sees disabilities, is that to not see disabilities as this negative thing, but it's part of who we are. And maybe that'll allow people to start to share and reveal what they're living with, and then be able to get the care they need, right? I mean, that's the whole point.
Yeah, absolutely. And what subtle signs should caregivers watch out for?
Well, obviously, if somebody shares they have a disability and you don't see them with an assistive device right off the bat, right? Are they using wheelchair? Are they using hearing aids? Are they using things that you can actually see? We need to make sure that we're not uh, um, thinking differently about that. We're like, you don't look like you have a disability, right? So because of that, I mean, we wrote the book But You Look Good for that reason. People would say, well, but you look good, and they disregarded somebody just shared their story. And if you don't believe their story, well, and we'll kind of talk about that a little bit later too, what that looks like. But the reality is that the subtle signs are maybe not so subtle. Somebody's sharing about it, but it doesn't seem like it makes sense to us. But
Right.
it's not about us making sense of it. I think about the pain scale, right? The pain scale was developed by doctors and said, because doctors couldn't determine your pain. You
Mhm.
can't see it. I mean, yes, somebody's maybe grimacing, but for them, the grimacing may be like a 3 because that 3 is a level of, I think about my wife who has MS and Lyme disease and been disabled for 30 plus years. Um, her pain scale, what a 3 on her pain scale would be like a 10 on mine, right? So she needs this difference, but you can't just go by how people look.
Yeah.
You can't go by how people this is a struggle that people with disabilities, especially invisible, struggle when they go to the doctor. They try to look like they have it all together. They dress up nice, they smile, and then the doctor's like, "Well, no, doesn't look like anything's wrong."
Yeah.
But what they need to do is actually, what do they look like every day, right? I mean, you need to show up in pajamas because that's what you're in most of the time, and maybe that's what you need to do, right? Don't look like you have it all together because you don't.
Mhm.
And so that helps that perception too.
Right. And how can agencies safely encourage disclosure?
It's about developing a relationship, and I know that's hard in an agency's model, but the reality is, if you're going to spend time with a person, is developing a relationship with them first, and that's about listening to them, right? Our theme in 2025 here is called "See the Invisible," right? So how do you see the invisible? Well, you do it in 3 ways. You listen, you believe, and you support, right? So first thing is you listen, right? So you got to take the time to listen, right? And obviously an agency, it's like that's their role initially, anyways, is to get what's going on, what are we learning about. So listening, but truly listening to what the person is saying, right? All the things they're saying. Next step is believing what they share. That's
Mhm.
the hard part, right? Because some things seem incredulous, right? I kind of mentioned earlier, where people maybe they get sick from somebody gets sick from fragrances, and you're like, well, hey, fragrances. I mean, why would the government allow something out there like fragrances if it makes you sick? Well, we can buy cigarettes still too, right? I mean, there's things that we can choose to do, and some people are impacted by it. So we've got to think about, or maybe somebody's like, I can't ride in a car for more than 5 minutes. I can't. Mornings are so tough for me that it takes me 4 hours to get ready. It's like, really? Come on. No, no. Believe what they say. You have to believe it, no matter how much you don't think. This is what is happening in their life. It's like the pain scale again, right? It's you got to believe it. And then the final thing, as I say, is provide support as needed, right? So if you think about it, sometimes the believing and listening is what they is that's the thing they need most of all, right? That may be a big solving of the just that whole thing, but providing that safe encouragement, you develop the relationship first, that then allows you to step into that next step of listening to them and find out maybe somebody's got lupus or Lyme disease or something. and you're not an expert in it, they are. So say, hey, I'd like to learn more about it. Tell me about it. I don't understand. How's it impact you? In different areas. How's it impact you in traveling in a car? How's it impact you in your home? How's it impact you with your diet? Those things. Really being sincerely interested in what they're going through and letting them be the expert. That's the hardest part. I mean, doctors struggle with this too, right? Healthcare professionals struggle with this all the time. It's like they spend 15 minutes with the patient. The patient spends their whole entire life with this. They're the experts. And obviously with the internet, and all this amazing stuff where, you can find out whatever you want on it, right? You can be an expert. So that's what I would say.
And Wayne, what policy changes foster inclusion?
I think it is back. I want to go back to really seeing this invisible thing. So what's a policy change? The policy change is that maybe the intake time is not just so much about filling out a bunch of forms, right? It's like, tell me your story. I'd like to learn. Within reasonable, what's acceptable, what they can learn, right? I mean, obviously there's laws and things like that, HIPAA and ADA and all these other two types of laws that come into this place. But if you're going to care for a person, you'll learn about them, because what you're going to learn about is how does their disability or illness impact their daily lives, and how has it impacted them over time, right? It's changed maybe over time or things like that. And maybe there's ways that they need help. I think about back to that kind of that notion of where we call people disabled who are not. Maybe they were in wheelchairs and we say, oh, you're disabled, like it's some big negative thing. And they would say, hey, I can do anything you can do, right? I mean, I think about it. I live in Colorado, and you can do sled hockey, you can ski, you can do. I used to say you couldn't go upstairs, but now they got cool wheelchairs that go upstairs. They go up in the mountains, with treads and go hike. I mean, all kinds of amazing stuff, right? And these people, in a lot of cases, are saying, I don't need any help, right? I mean, I can do all these amazing things. I can work in a wheelchair. I can do all those things. But what happened is we thought, well, that's how everybody with a disability is. They don't need any help, right? That's not the case. A lot of people with invisible disabilities actually need help. The problem is they look like they don't, right? Mm-hmm. And so there's this notion of, so the story is so critically important to learn about that as you're filling out all these forms about what about this, what about this, what about this. It's really saying, I want to know about you as a person, because if I'm going to have a relationship where I'm going to take care of you, I need to know more than just how do you help somebody with lupus, right? Do this, and this, these steps that we've learned, or how do you deal with anxiety or whatever, right? It's really, I think those policy changes are, as much as it's difficult, doctors can't do this more than 15-minute thing, but I will tell you what, a lot of these people with disabilities who need care, they've got their life in books. They've got it all in spreadsheets and all this stuff. And maybe it's like, hey, send me those. I'd like to learn more. Give me what I can do to help you better. Right. And most of all, how do you need help? Mm-hmm. Not how, this is how I think I'm going to give you help. That's the big thing, is the person who has the disability or illness or invisible disability, they're the ones who are the experts in how they need help. And sometimes it may be simple, sometimes it may be complicated, but we really got to understand. We can't just say, well, this is how all people with MS need this kind of help, right? We can't just make judgments, because if you think about it, autism really did a great job of saying autism is on a spectrum. Right. All illnesses are on a spectrum, and many people have multiples, or they have diabetes and maybe they have lupus. And how do those interact? That's totally different than just somebody with lupus or somebody with diabetes. And we can't make assumptions. For example, people say this all the time with my wife. Well, is she in a wheelchair? Well, she was diagnosed with primary progressive MS at the age of 27, so 30 plus years ago. Okay, primary progressive is MS with no good days. Okay, mm-hmm. A wheelchair just defines in a person with MS is where the lesions are and the impact, but it doesn't necessarily say the illness is more progressive than it isn't. So we can't make decisions on, because we see an assistive device that this must be worse off. We don't know that, right? Think about glasses, right? We don't know. Do you wear glasses for driving, for reading? That's it, by the way, that's a disability, right? Yeah. Same type of thing, right? We can't judge by what we see or hear. So that's what I would say. The policy changes really have to be the story.
Right. And my last question for you, Wayne, what priority steps should agencies take to lead change?
I think taking the reality is taking visible disabilities is it's real. It's the biggest edge. It's the thing that limits people in a sense. Kind of go back to this wheelchair thing. If you're in a wheelchair, and maybe somebody's a paraplegic and they had lost the use of their legs, or they were injured in war and they had an amputee or something along those lines, but they're doing amazing stuff. They're doing Ironmans, they're running, they're doing races, they're doing all this stuff. But what if they have PTSD? It's the PTSD that's the limiting thing. Or what if they have chronic pain? I think about a lot of people with paralysis. Sometimes they have phantom pain, or they have other types of pain that is a totally different thing that's invisible, that
Mhm.
invisible nature. So we need to think about what are those things that are not visible that would impact the way I give you care, right? That may be the thing I'm focusing on. Yes, I may need be able to have a wheelchair accessible van or something if somebody's in a wheelchair, right? Or there are other things. For example, boy, one of the things that really gets me is accessible parking spots are designed for people in wheelchairs, right? So there's curb cutouts, there's markers that go across parking driveways and stuff. The problem is a lot of times you're not close to the store or
Right.
to the restaurant because of that. Well, a lot of times people with invisible disabilities don't use a wheelchair on a regular basis. They might use it for long distances, like if you go to an amusement park or something where they're going to
Mhm.
be going all day. But in most cases, they don't use a wheelchair. They might have a cane, they might use a walker, or they might not use anything. And the
Right.
problem is that the location of the spot is so far away that it's going to be just overwhelming for them, right? So in that case, it may be, well, let me drop you off at the door instead of parking in the spot, right?
Mhm.
Or maybe it's like, would you like to take the elevator or the stairs? Right now, we think about that. Hey, taking the stairs is healthy, right? Well, a lot of people, they may not be able to take the stairs, or in the age of COVID and things like that, they don't want to be in an elevator because they have an
Right.
immune deficiency thing, and they're willing to take the stairs, right? So it's giving people choices. It's saying, do you need me to drop you off at the front door? Do you need me to, how can I, you don't use a wheelchair on a regular basis. Do you need a wheelchair? Because we're going to go to the mall, right? Do you need a wheelchair, or do you want to use one of the scooters there, right? It's that really it's taking those steps to think about invisible disabilities is extremely important. And the other thing is to say you're valued. We're all about valuing people. Is you're not lesser because you have a disability. Like I said, back to what I talked about earlier, it's part of who you are now,
Right.
right? It's the thing that is part of who you are. So how can I value as a person with a disability, right? It's just part of who you are. So what can we do? What kind of accommodations will we do? What extra care things can I do? What can I do special for you, right? The priority step of really saying, believing people. I'm going to go back to the whole thing of listen, believe, and support, because believing is that one of our biggest things at Invisible Disabilities is believing people when you can't see it. Right?
Right.
Seeing,
Yeah.
we always think of seeing is believing. Well, not anymore, right? You
Mhm.
know what it is? It's listening is believing. Actually, it's an interesting dynamic change of seeing is not believing. So listening is
Right.
believing. So I think that agencies could really take the lead on that by understanding, even though we can't see it, even though it doesn't make sense, when the person says they need care, provide them the care, believe it. And sometimes it's even hard for insurance companies to understand that. And they're like, well, they really don't need the care, right? So it's going that extra mile to say, yes, it's important.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. No, I love that. Well, thank you so much, Wayne. We really appreciate your time today. And to all of our listeners, this has been CareSmartz 360 on air. We'll see you next time.